And then Wendy, you sent me an email about that poem that I sent out, and I thought before we got started on the regular part of tonight that I would pull that up and let's take a look at it.
Is that the one with that you had that beautiful photograph with?
Yes. This poem is not particularly related to getting into the subject matter that we're headed into tonight, but I just really like this poem, and I thought I would send it out to you all. And a lot of people that read a lot of Emily Dickinson poetry have never read this poem or commented about it, and I think it's just great. But I guess maybe one of the reasons I relate to it is because I remember very well with my mom and dad that we would stop on the side of the road and walk down through some woods to a place that they thought might be an old burial ground or something they'd been to before, and read what's on the tombstones. And that's what she's doing here in the second 4 lines of this poem. Strangers stroll by and spelled at the lone orthography of the elder dad. You know, I mean, I'm not suggesting this as a pastime, but but necessarily, but it is something that I have done, is gone down and looked at old tombstones and all. And then I also like the last verse when she talks about, you forget, and all of us have done this when you're hiking or looking for a place that's unfamiliar, something that you really should know, but you have forgotten this specific way to get there, but it just sort of instinct sort of tells you, I think it's this way. I think it should be down this hill or across this branch here or up this creek or something like that. It's just, I mean, I just think her imagery is just fantastic. The way that she can create in your mind pictures of things. So let's see, I'll stop sharing that one. Get back to a little more direct. I wanted to start out tonight. We're going to, these last 2 weeks, tonight and next week, we're going to talk more about Emily's faith-based poetry. And it's really difficult, it's impossible, frankly, to decipher exactly what she thought, what she felt, and how she got that way, how those feelings, whatever they were, came to be. We know that she started at school at 8 years old at the Amherst school that she stayed until she was 15, and at this school, at this point in time, there was tension in the United States between science and religion. We were talking about going from the Enlightenment period and then through the religion trying to make a comeback and so forth, and the evangelists going through the area holding revivals and whatnot. So there was a lot of tension there. And so when Emily was in school, there was a lot of science being taught. There was a lot of questioning of things that were, it was sort of a liberal atmosphere, certainly for that period of time. And so she became to become have some sort of ambivalence about the things that she had been taught in church and so forth, and start to have doubts and wonderings about it. So, plus she was just a very bright person, and she was nervy, so she had the willingness to express herself in some of these areas. So when she graduated, she went for 1 year to Mount Holyoke Seminary. And there, this is where she really was subjected to a more intense religious experience. There was, the head of the seminary was a lady by the name of Mary Lyon, Lyon, and her whole purpose in running this cemetery was to get as many of these students to be professed Christians and to avow their Christianity and the fact that they had been saved. That was her purpose and goal. So she had them divided actually literally into three groups. There were 200 and the year that Emily was there were 230 students. Approximately 80 of them she had classified as professed Christians. I think the term, I've forgotten the exact term that she used, but professed Christians. And then there was a middle group of about 30 or so that she thought were prospective Christians, that they were in the works to become Christians. And then there was another group of some 20 or 30 that she had put in a category of no hope. There's no hope for this group. They are not making any progress toward being a Christian. And of course, Emily found herself in this last group. And it was just a lot of pressure on her to make more progress toward becoming an avowed Christian. She liked the school, and I'll read you a little bit of her accounting of what a day at Mount Holyoke Seminary would be like. She said, at 6 o'clock, we all rise and we breakfast at 7. Our study hours begin at 8. At 9, we meet in the seminary hall for devotions. And at 10:30, I recite a review of ancient history in connection with which we read Goldsmith and Crenshaw. At 11, I recite a lesson in Pope's essay on man, which is merely transposition. And at 12, I practice calisthenics. And at 12:30, I read until dinner, which is at 12:30. And after dinner, from 1:30 until 2, I sing in the seminary hall. And from 2:30 until 3:30, I practice upon the piano. At 3:30, I go to sections where we give all our accounts of the day, including our absences and so forth. She goes on, and I won't read all of this, but she says, we have supper, and at 6, silent study hours, and then until the retiring bell, which rings at 8:45. But she says the tardy bell does not actually ring. That's the late bell, but the tardy bell does not ring until 9:45, so that we don't often obey the first warning to retire. So she seems to like it. She says one more thing here on the next page. She says, my domestic work is not difficult, and it consists in carrying the knives from the first tier of tables and at morning and noon and at night, and washing and wiping the same quantity of knives. So she's the knife person. She's responsible for distributing and collecting the knives and washing them and cleaning them. And she says that is not difficult for her. So she only stayed there 1 year. She didn't go back for her second semester, but it was not because of anything to do with faith-related issues. She was starting to have some bad health, and she had to take off, stay out a month anyway. So her father just made the decision not to send her back. And so when she left the seminary, her separation from an intense feeling about her faith even increased. The disconnection with the atmosphere of someone trying to persuade her to become a Christian actually worked in the favor of her not having her mind on it that much, and so she drifted further away. I had a quote here by the theologian Paul Ricoeur that he had a name for that, but of what I don't see it right this minute, but he said he calls it that she lost the immediacy of belief. In other words, it didn't become a matter of a subject of bother to her anymore. But she really lamented while she was there. She wrote a letter to a friend of hers up Beirut, and she said, perhaps I have neglected the one thing needful when all others were obtaining it. I know that I have seemed to be uninterested in the all important subject, but I am unhappy, she said, and I regret that I did not give up and become a Christian. It is not now too late, but it is hard for me to give up the world. When her friend informed her that she was ready to cast her burden upon Christ, Emily told her that I wish I could say that, but I fear that I never can. So it's just very difficult to know what was going on, but she seemed to think that avowing Christianity and professing faith would somehow take away from her enjoyment of nature and the world, that she would feel some sort of guilt. And you know, the mentality of it can be that we're really not supposed to enjoy this life all that much, and that if we are really having a great time and fun and everything, that we are not sufficiently looking forward to heaven, where things will be total bliss. And so she sensed that, and it's reflected in some of her poetry. And I think it's in a poem that we will talk about in a few minutes. So it's sort of hard to know. I think that we just have to turn to her poems and see what she says when we look at the poems, and gather from those poems how she felt about things. But when she began this reclusiveness early in her, about her mid-20s. And so by the time that she was in early 30s, 32, she was virtually a recluse. She did not meet with many people. Hardly anyone knew her. And I remember, you remember we talked about her funeral, at which there were just a few friends there, and some people from the college came, and because the family had such an association with the college. But there were only a few people there that had ever seen her, that really knew her. And so becoming a loner and staying in her room and refusing to meet with people and interact with people except by poetry and letters started at a really early age for her. And so different writers that have written about Emily give different theories as to what's going on here. One theory is that she just became wed to her poetry, that she thought that was her purpose in life, is to write poetry, and that's what she enjoyed doing, and that it gave her a freedom that she did not have in any other way. And she certainly wasn't a person who was prone to be particularly lonesome or anything like that, because she could feel like she was in company of other people just in her own mind. We've talked about that before. She said, I don't really have to take a trip to enjoy the season. She said, I can visit all 4 seasons of the year in my own mind. So she had the ability to not feel alone, even though physically she was alone. But here again, I sort of fumble and mumble about this, but these things that I'm suggesting we will see in some of the poems that we'll take a look at. So she had this reluctance to make a complete separation from the church. She was going to church. I think I made a note here. She was still attending church up until 1854. So that would mean she'd been 24 years old. was the last known time that she attended church, because she wrote a letter to friends about a sermon that she had just heard at church that really agitated her. A visiting minister had preached about death and judgment and what would become of those, meaning Austin and me, she was talking about her brother and her, who behaved improperly. And somehow the sermon scared me. When she had been troubled by the sobering message, she concealed her distress from her family, because Father and Vinny looked very solemn, as if all of this were true. But the subject of perdition seemed to really please the minister, and somehow it was very solemn to me. So she took issue with preachers seeming to delight in talking about people being condemned to hell, and you're being held over the fires of hell if you don't profess Christ, and all those kinds of things. It just was not the approach that she needed in her particular situation. So that had that not note survived, it would not be known that when was the last time that she started attending church. So there's no record of her going after that time. So she never went to church again in her life. She didn't go much of anywhere. So let's go ahead now and take a look at some of these poems, and I'll see if I can pull them up. Yeah, let's see here. Okay, I selected a few poems that talk about the how that she may have felt certain way as a child, but now that she's maturing and she's seeing things another way, she's not as perhaps as gullible as she has been.
Is that supposed to be in the screen?
I didn't share it? Okay. Share screen. Yeah. Yeah. Is that better?
There it is.
There we go. Yeah. Okay. I backslid from last week. I did so well last week. Okay. But this poem 637, it addresses the idea that as you grow older, you're not as naive about some of the things that you've been taught as perhaps you were, and particularly things about faith and religion and so forth. You've been taught things as a child, but now you sort of see a little bit better. All of these poems that I pulled up here on this sheet are sort of addressing that same thing. I made a note. Richard Sewell, in his biography of Emily, said she knows how innocence ends, but for 2 stanzas she glories in it. So she's talking about that it was really nice to be in that situation where you believe things that people tell you and you delight in them, but then unfortunately you come to a point where you are dealing in a more real world. Let's see. Some of her poems just really take issue. She was Emily seemed to have a lot of poetry that dealt with a very positive look and attitude toward Christ. She was, and the reason being that she pointed out that Christ had lived like we live, had suffered. Let me see if there's another one of these that I wanted to. Oh, this, let me come back to what I just started to say. This poem, I Dwell in Possibility, is one of her very most popular poems. And it talks, this is reinforcement for the idea that she devoted her life to poetry and that was the thing that was important to her, that her real goal in life was to be a poet and to put her thoughts down in the form of poetry. So that's the theme of that poem, I think. Any of these that you all have read and have any comments about, we can talk more about. Her issue with God has to do with two things: the issue of justice and the issue of distance. The idea that God has distanced himself from humanity, and so her poems that seem to be sort of sacrilegious, and those contexts deal with primarily with those two issues. So she in this poem here, I know that he exists somewhere in silence. He has hid his rare life from our gross eyes. So 'tis an instant's play, 'tis a fond ambush, just to make bliss earn her own surprise. But should the play prove piercing earnest, should the glee glaze in death's stiff stare, would not the fun look too expensive? Would not the jest have crawled too far? So my note there says, she's saying, is it possible that God has taken this so far that he really doesn't exist? Or is he just making us think that he doesn't exist, but he's leading us to a point where we're apt to believe that it really doesn't exist? If you all have any comments about these, chime in, because they all deal with essentially the same thing. This poem that I never lost as much but twice, that deviates a little bit in it. I think that poem is about deaths that have of people in her life. I lost that two people that she knew are now have been buried, and she stood a beggar before the door of God. And then maybe someone else now has come along and passed away. So she says, I am poor once more. This little 4-line poem, Faith is a Fine Invention, is one of the poems that I think is misused a little bit, because it just cuts to the chase. When in 4 lines, she says, faith is a fine invention when gentlemen can see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency. So it makes it look like she's saying, yeah, faith's okay, but there comes a time when you've got to really look at things with a microscope. You've got to look at them in a more real way, in a more scientific way, in a more logical way. And I'm not too sure that most Dickinson scholars agree that this poem is as harsh as it may sound. This one said she really knew, Emily really knew the Bible very well. She knew all the stories of the Bible. She knew scripture. She knew the Old Testament. She knew the connection with the Old Testament and the New Testament. She knew how the New Testament quotes and uses the Old Testament and the prophets. said, you're right, the way is narrow and difficult the gate, and few there be correct again that enter in. 'Tis costly, so are purples, 'tis the price of breath, but with the discount of the grave turned by the broker's death. And after that, there's heaven, the good man's dividend, and bad men go to jail, I guess. So it's sort of a sarcastic, if you will, approach to that scripture about the way is narrow and difficult is the gate.
And again, on that one, it also reemphasizes what you were saying about her just not being so sure about and bad men go to jail, I guess. You know, her not so sure that she believes in all of that.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. She in many of her poems, she talks about the portion of Calvinism that it's the tea and the tulip. I think it's the total depravity. In other words, we're all hopelessly lost in a sinful condition. That's sort of the basic of 1/5 of Calvinism. So she said, in several of her poems, she will say, we stand accused, but then she'll say, of what? Of what? Of what? You know, she feels like she's under this curse to damnation, but she doesn't know exactly what she's being accused of doing.
That's like the third one that you said. Of God we ask one favor. And it said, of God we ask one favor, that we may be forgiven for what he has presumed to know. The crime from us is hidden. So I think she doesn't know in that one. I took that out in that one.
Yeah.
That she doesn't know what she's guilty of always. My favorite one of I love the very last one, Paul. Wait, where is it?
I love that one too, Ashley.
Some
Of course I
keep,
prayed. Yeah.
Some keep the Sabbath going.
Oh yeah, that one. Yep.
I keep it staying at home with a bodily.
Let's drop back before that. We get that one in a second. But
okay.
That, of course, I prayed, number 376. Because I have mentioned this poem before, because it's sort of funny. She said, of course I prayed, and did God care? He cared as much as on the air a bird had stamped her foot, cried, give me my reason life I had not had but for yourself, for a better charity. To leave me at the Adam's tomb, merry and naught and gay and numb, this was smart misery. So she's saying that I prayed, but you know, it didn't seem to mean anymore to God that if I just been that a bird in there was stamping her foot and saying, "Give me." So she had the willingness to put these things into poetry, but you know, to me, and I keep saying this about Emily Dickinson, she's revealing that all this was important to her. You know, a person that really is an unbeliever, a total unbeliever, they wouldn't spend any time worrying about whether a bird was stamping his foot. She's really, to me, saying all of this is very, very important to me. And I think about it a lot, and I have doubts about it, but it really is a meaningful thing in my life, because so much of her poetry is like this. And but this one some keep the Sabbath going to church is probably the most quoted poem of Emily when someone is making the argument that she refused to be a Christian, that she was not a Christian, and that she had rejected Christianity. Some keep the Sabbath going to church, and I keep it staying at home with a bobolink for a cloister and an orchard for a dome. Some keep the Sabbath in surplice. I just wear my wings. Surplice is some sort of a religious apparel, right?
Robe kind of thing. Yeah.
I just wear my wings, and instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings. God preaches, a noted clergyman, and the sermon is never long. So instead of going to heaven at last, I'm going all along. So let's see. Somewhere I had written down that she was telling someone that, and some notes, I'm a little bit disjointed in my notes tonight, that she said that she was talking about, she said, I went out and sat down in the garden. It was on Sunday. And she said, and 5 hens came up and joined me. So she said there was some hens that joined her.
I find that when sometimes with some of her poems, like the last one, that some keep the Sabbath going to church, I read it and I get it right away. And then the one above it, of course I prayed. I'll start with it and I'll go, okay, I'm following. And all of a sudden, I had not but for yourself, 'twere better charity to leave me in the Adam's tomb, merry and not and gay and numb, than the smart misery. I'm like, wait, what? What was that? I'm like, I just find that a lot of them, I'm like, okay, I can get it. And then the other one, I'm like, oh gosh, I got the first part, but now I got to really figure out what is the meaning. I get tripped up a lot. I guess that's
what happens to me all the time. I read the
Yeah.
first few lines. This is great. Perfect. And then I get a little further down and I'm lost.
Yeah, I think that's probably why I like the ones that I understand right away more than the ones that
I think there she's saying that I would have been better off if I hadn't prayed, because it left me in a worse condition than I was before. Merry and naught and gay and numb. Thanks for this smart misery
Right.
that I've gotten myself into.
Right.
Wendy, there's some that I read that I don't get it from the get-go. So just
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
And there were a few that you sent and I'm like, okay, wait.
like the one, Paul, if you
Most.
scroll up, there's one of the first ones, I can't remember if you'll scroll up, it's just a depressing, it's like she's talking about the morning, and I guess it's when she's lost her friends at the young age. Keep on scrolling.
Is it in this
Right
list,
one?
Bernard?
Yeah, it's
This twice I'm lost, that one?
you
Or
may
a loss
maybe
of something I ever felt.
keep on
Ever
going.
felt.
Is that at the top?
Keep going. Yeah, that one.
A loss of something ever felt.
The loss of something else.
Yeah, the loss of something ever. I mean,
Yeah.
that was like just sad. Bereft, yeah, what I knew not. Too young that any should suspect a mourner walked among the children. And I assume that's she talking about just her grief at a young age, losing
Yeah, didn't she lose her friend young?
friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't
Not
know.
sitting, looking oppositely for the sight of the kingdom of heaven. It just seems like that just seemed like a really sad and
Bleak.
mournful.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is. Well, for sure, some of them are very, not only hard to understand, but the parts you do understand is very sad.
Yeah, a lot of sadness.
But I have let's see, another Share screen for, let's see. Now, why am I doing? Oh, let's see.
Paul, I did like, maybe I'll talk, I'm sorry, I was a little late, but the sheet, or maybe your email, you had her talk about, like, there was a phrase from her of my belief or my unbelief, but a million times a day I go back and forth. What was the, wait, let me see if I can find it again. Because I really liked it, but now I'm not recounting it very well.
Yeah. I both believe and unbelieve a million times a day.
Right.
Let's see. I am. See if I can get back to my.
Yeah, we
share.
both believe and disbelieve. Yeah, 100 times an hour, which keeps believing nimble.
Yeah.
And I kind of liked that, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. If I can find how to get back to share screen. Let's see. Oh, no, that is not. Let's see. Let me try one more time.
There it is.
No, I think that's the ones we've already had. Let me go back to. Just a moment. Okay, now.
You sent it on December 3rd.
Okay, here we go. I mentioned a little while ago that whereas Emily in a lot of her poems has a quarrel with God, she has an association with Christ, with Jesus, that is reflected in a lot of her poems that has to do with his experience of his true experience of agony, his experience of rejection, his experience of persecution. This is one of her good poems about that. 241 says, I like a look of agony because I know it's true. Men do not sham convulsion nor simulate a throe. The eyes glaze once, and that is death, impossible to feign. The beads upon the forehead by homely anguish strong. So that is her thought process of Christ and the throes of death and suffering that she identifies with, and she says that is true agony, that it can't be fake, that is real. The eyes glaze once, and that is death. So let's see, another one is this is the sort of a famous Emily poem because she refers to Christ as the tender pioneer. And I think I mentioned to you all, there are a lot of books that use phrases from her poetry as the name of the book if it's about her. And there is a book called The Tender Pioneer. But she says, life is what we make of it. Death we do not know. Christ's acquaintance with him justifies him though. So she's saying that I identify with Christ because he has experienced himself what this death that we're all looking forward to. So he's validated it. Christ's acquaintance with him and it justifies him. He would trust no stranger, other could betray, just his own endorsement that suffices me. All the other distance he has traversed first, no new mile remaineth far as paradise. His sure foot proceeding, tender pioneer, base must be the coward, dare not venture now. In other words, if Christ has gone ahead of us and gone through this experience of this suffering and death, then we should have the courage to follow. Is what I get out of it. I think that's what she's saying. In several of her poems, and some that we'll talk about next week, she talks about faith, and she uses the term piers, P-I-E-R-S, and she's using them in the context of something that supports a bridge, say a bridge of faith, and it has piers that support it. But she's saying that, and I love this analogy, she's saying that faith is a pierless bridge. And in one of the poems that we'll take a look at. In other words, it's a bridge that doesn't have these supports underneath. So, but this poem here, how brittle are the piers on which our faith does tread. No bridge below does totter so, yet none has such a crowd. It is as old as God, indeed it was built by him. He sent his son to test the plank, and he pronounced it firm. You know, a pastor could make a tremendous sermon out of that. I think it would make a tremendous sermon. He sent his son to test the plank, and he pronounced it firm. So it's like she's saying that God's plan was to proceed our walking toward this end of time by sending someone to experience it ahead of us. These are just 3 points that I picked out that sort of illustrate her association with Jesus Christ as in the idea of someone that has gone ahead and experienced the genuine suffering. See if I had anything else in my notes that I was going to mention.
How did you get to be studying Emily Dickinson so much?
You think what?
How did you get to be such a follower of Emily Dickinson or studier?
I don't remember exactly, and I don't remember when, but it's been at least 25 or 30 years. There's someone that I had an opportunity to discuss Emily Dickinson with a great deal was a friend of ours, friend of Donna and mine, that she and her husband lived here in Tampa, and she had gotten her doctorate at the University of South Florida, and she wrote her dissertation on Emily Dickinson on her music, and wrote a book about that. So she and I would talk about Emily Dickinson a lot, and sort of get in some little bit of arguments once in a while, because she had her own, as I've told you, most everybody that has their own ideas about Emily Dickinson and Susan Dickinson, or Emily Dickinson and faith issues and so forth. And so hers and mine didn't always agree, but it was always in a friendly way. But she taught some Emily Dickinson courses, I think, at the University of South Florida. She was quite knowledgeable of Emily's work, and her husband had had a trust fund that had been left to him by his grandfather, and he was in the disposition. And when he passed away, the disposition of this huge amount of trust fund fell to this lady that I was just talking about to get rid of. And so she was casting around for things to do with all this money that she had. And one of the things that she paid for was a complete restoration of all of the fencing around the Emily Dickinson homestead
Wow.
there in Amherst. And so what you would see there, if you went today, the restored fencing and all that's been done, say, within the last 15 or 20 years, she provided the financing for that. So that was a good thing. I don't really have, I think I've sort of exhausted my notes in these and the poems. For next week, I'll try to gather a little more, I'll be a little more coherent and organized and gather a good deal more of her faith poems. And they're not all gloomy and negative as this. Some of them are just the opposite, which makes us wonder exactly where. But the only way that I think you can draw conclusions is just by reading the poems. There was just not enough communication with her for her to sit down with someone and say, "Let me tell you what I believe." I don't think that ever happened, and I don't think anyone would claim to really know. I know her father worried about her after she came home from Mount Holyoke and she started to be more reclusive. He worried about her salvation and worried about her not being a member of the church and everything. So he had the pastor of the church actually come to their house and talk to Emily. And so he did, and she was willing to talk to him. And so when the pastor went back to Emily's father, he just said one word. He said, "Sound." He found her sound. Her religion was sound. So that was all he cared to say about it. So evidently he was satisfied. But on the general subject, just take another minute or two. On the general subject of doubt entering into our faith, I taught a class at our Sunday school a few years ago on doubt and faith. That was the name of it. Our pastor at our Presbyterian church, he was in awe that I would even dare teach a class like this, because he said, how are you going to get away with that? But it was a great class. It was maybe 25 or so people in this Sunday school class. And the class was based upon the idea that, and a lot of and gave illustrations of a lot of how doubt has sort of permeated Christianity and faith right down through the whole thing, starting back with in the New Testament, when Thomas wanted to feel the scars in Jesus' hands, and so the contention that I made in this class was that doubt is sort of a fuel to faith. I sort of took the position that if you've never had doubts about faith, you really probably haven't thought very much about it. If you really never had any doubts about it, it goes into a deeper trench, I think, with faith to acknowledge doubts and saying, I wonder if this is true, or I'm not worried that I don't know all of this. I'm not worried that I don't have this answer or that answer, So it was a very successful Sunday school class, and it was sort of, as I say, I'm just clicked myself
Did
off.
you quote any of Emily Dickinson's poems
Yes.
in that class?
Yes, I did. I did quote a lot of Emily Dickinson in that class.
Yeah, I bet.
So now what have I done? Does anybody see anybody? Let's see.
Yes, I see.
Okay, here we
everybody.
are.
Okay. I don't see the poems, but I see.
Okay. Screen share something. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we're a little short of an hour, but I don't. Does anyone else have anything to add or anything you'd like for me to have prepared for next week?
Oh, can I ask a question? And I missed the first two sessions, so if this is remedial, you can just tell me. But because she published so few poems while she was living, how did they know that she was as brilliant, like when she died and they discovered, like, did it take a while for people to appreciate her poetry and for her to gain the renown? Because they wouldn't have really seen or known much of her prior. Is that right? Or
No, they really, when she passed away, people knew that she was writing poems, and they knew that she, is that a back feed? And they knew that she was sending poems to people. Do you hear a
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know if it's me.
sort of echo? But it was not known that she had been the prolific poem writer that she was until they were discovered in her room.
did they know they were good though? Like she may have been prolific, but that she was actually,
Oh, you're saying not the quantity, but how did
No.
they realize?
yeah, the quality, like that she was, yeah, not that she had produced all these poems, that actually that they were, remarkable, that she was as brilliant and talented as she was.
Well, when they first, starting in 1890, when the first volumes of her work were published, they were just tremendous hits, and people just loved her poetry, and they sold out, and there was the second edition, third edition, fourth edition, fifth edition, sixth edition. They just kept printing these books and selling them with all these with her poetry, and people were really attracted to it. And I think that it's even more appreciated now than it has ever been before. I think you'll see more uh, uh, of her poetry around and her quotes and so forth than ever before.
But I get you, what you're saying is the fact that it did get published and people became aware of it and instantly realized how brilliant and capable and outstanding it was, right?
Yeah, she had no interest in having her poetry published, and I think she wanted it appreciated, but she didn't have any interest in publishing it. But once she passed away, then there were others that said, we need to publish this work. It is of that importance that we publish it. And then we've talked about before how that was sort of mishandled, and that a lot of the poems were changed and so forth and edited one thing and another that made us not get the genuine article very early on.
And didn't you also mention too that her sister-in-law Susan also, was accomplished and brilliant in her own right, and they had so much correspondence back and forth. Susan knew how brilliant Emily was.
Yes.
So, and that was a big
She
part of
saw the talent just from their correspondence and thought, okay,
and their time
there's a
together.
treasure trove here. Yeah, that the world should see.
Mhm.
Yes, well, and also Susan had some 400 poems that Emily had written herself. She had them. Not all of them were written to Susan personally, but some of them had been written and Emily had given to Susan to edit, to look at, to make comments about. She was sort of her confidant as far as what do you think of this? And Susan would say, well, I would change this word or this line and all. Some of these poems seem like that she wrote so many so quickly. In 1 year, she almost averaged a poem a day. But yet these poems are well thought out, and I mentioned, I think last week, that there are drafts of these poems that maybe go for 2 or 3 years, where the same poem shows up a year later with a couple of lines changed. So she was paying attention to what she was doing, and she wanted to say exactly what the word she wanted to use. But it's just it's amazing that it all worked out the way it did, to finally have her recognized as perhaps the premier American poet. I'm not sure of anyone that would be rated higher than Emily Dickinson. Probably some on a level with her.
Well,
Any
thank
other?
you. Thank you for your time once
Yeah,
again.
thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming. We'll see you next week then.
Go Bucks. Is that what we're?
Yeah, I gotta go watch the Bucks game.
Okay, go watch. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
See y'all. Bye.
Bye.